Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, April 28, 2023. U.S. House votes to reinstate tariffs on solar panels imported from 4 Southeast Asian countries. President Biden suspended the tariffs, seeking to increase solar panel installations in the U.S., part of his climate agenda. But supporters of today's bill say that Chinese companies are pushing solar products through those other countries to get around tariffs on Chinese goods. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau comparing U.S. and Canadian trade strategies, as Canada is signing on to many trade agreements. Prime Minister in a conversation at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Congress entering the weekend without a deal to raise the federal debt limit. We'll hear from the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Republican Congressman Don Bacon about the House Republican strategy to tie the debt limit increase to cutting spending. Future of the National Flood Insurance Program. The debt of that program, now over $20 billion, debated at a House subcommittee hearing with testimony from a top official at FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Plus, the latest from the State Department on the Russian airstrikes overnight on Ukrainian cities and on helping Americans in war-ravaged Sudan get out of that country. And we'll preview this weekend's White House Correspondents Association dinner with the association president, NPR's Tamara Keith, and this year's entertainment, comedian Roy Wood Jr. of The Daily Show. And now to the House of Representatives, which voted today to repeal President Biden's suspension of import tariffs on solar panels from 4 Southeast Asian countries: Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Reuters reports solar panels from those 4 nations, which host manufacturing facilities owned by Chinese companies, account for about 80% of U.S. supplies. The House vote was 221 to 202, mostly along party lines, Republicans voting yes and Democrats voting no. But 12 Democrats did vote yes, 8 Republicans voted no. The bill's sponsor, Congressman Bill Posey, Republican from Florida, on the House floor.
Today we are considering a historic bipartisan resolution to support American solar manufacturers and workers and hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for dodging our trade laws. H.J. Res. 39 will undo a Biden administration's rule that allowed Chinese solar manufacturers who use forced labor to dodge American trade laws and dump inferior product on the United States. They're doing this by slapping a new label on their products and exporting them to third-party countries like Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Department of Commerce, in a preliminary investigation, concluded that the Chinese solar companies are in fact sending their products through these 4 Southeastern Asian countries to avoid paying a higher tariff. If left in place, this rule will benefit the Chinese Communist Party. Make no mistake about that. They are not our friends. They are an enemy, at the detriment of American companies and workers. Unfortunately, some believe we must tolerate China's bad decisions and remain dependent on adversarial nations to create renewable energy. That's a false choice, so says the AFL-CIO. The United States can and should focus its resources into developing our own solar products and boosting American competitiveness around the world, rather than supporting China's quest to dominate the market and control energy supply. This bipartisan resolution is a critical step to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for everything from their human rights abuses to their unfair trade practices, all the while protecting American solar manufacturers and workers. Why not be an exporter of great American products rather than an importer of cheap Chinese products? And for those who say they're clean energy advocates, I'd like to remind them that the Chinese solar panels are built without any environmental protection or controls whatsoever. American solar panels have environmental protection requirements. Most are aware, and I hope everyone in this chamber for sure is aware, that through economic dominance, China hopes to achieve military superiority. And we need to stop helping China do that.
Congressman Bill Posey, Republican from Florida, debating on the House floor. More from the Reuters article on this bill. President Biden last year waived tariffs on solar products from the 4 nations as the Commerce Department was considering whether those imports were dodging duties on goods made in China and violating U.S. law. Months later, the department issued a preliminary decision to impose tariffs on solar products Chinese companies make in those countries that match current tariffs on goods they make in China. The agency is expected to issue its final decision next week. Opposing the bill today, Congressman Mike Thompson, Democrat from California.
Mr. Speaker, I share my colleague's goal of ensuring that our trade laws are fairly enforced. And I certainly share our collective goal of promoting domestic manufacturing and jobs. But let's be honest. The idea that our president wants to ship jobs to China and make us dependent on China for our energy, this may sound good, this political hyperbole may sound good, but it's flat out nonsense. Truth is, if this legislation were to become law, it would cost, not create, American jobs. And in the long run, it would make it harder, not easier, for our country to become energy independent. This bill would make it impossible to deploy solar energy quickly enough here in our country, here in the United States of America. It would undercut the climate change investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in fighting climate change and creating green jobs in our history. This is an investment that we need. We've already heard from numerous speakers the impact that we've felt from climate change, fires, floods, drought, an increase in agricultural pests. This is at a point where we need to deploy everything we can to make sure we address the issue of climate change. We all want solar products manufactured right here at home, and that will happen. But in the short run, our domestic industry can't increase production fast enough to meet our demand or meet our climate goals. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Congressman Mike Thompson, Democrat from California, on the House floor before the House passed this bill to overturn the suspension of import tariffs on solar panels from Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. It was a joint resolution brought up under the CRA, Congressional Review Act, a law which allows Congress to vote to reverse federal agency rules. The bill now heads to the Senate. President Biden has warned he would veto it if it passes there and reaches his desk. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre got a question about the bill today during a news conference with scholarship recipients of the White House Correspondents Association.
Hello, sir.
Hey, Grant Schwab, Northwestern University.
Northwestern, another Northwestern. All right.
I have a question about Energy and the Congressional Review Act making its way through Congress. So I know some congressional Dems have signaled support for resuming tariffs on solar products coming from China but routed through Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. The administration, I know, said it would veto the measure if it came to the president's desk. But I was wondering, what's the administration's message to, especially the Democratic members of Congress, but also the Republican members who support the resumption of these tariffs?
Yeah, so I think we put out a SAP on this, laying out our view. Look, our message to Dems, and I mean, like I said, we've worked really closely with many of the Democrats in Congress, and there are things that we are going to work closely on and be in line, and there's some things that we believe, like this administration is going to believe, that we either need to take a different look at it or the approach needs to be a little different. As you know, when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to trades, that comes out of USTR. They are the agency that looks very closely at this. This is also dealing with China, so this is also a diplomatic issue too that we deal with. The State Department deals with that, so it's very complicated and nuanced. But look, again, we work very closely with them. Some of our Republican colleagues, we've been able to get some bipartisan legislation. You think about the Chips and Science Act. That's a really important piece of legislation that allows us to be competitive across the world, that allows us to continue what we talk about when we talk about China and be competitive with them. We're not looking for conflict, we're looking for competition. And so it's all in the same, kind of in the same vein. But again, very nuanced, very complicated stuff. It's not very simple because it involves so many different pieces of what we're trying to get done domestically and also globally.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. The Hill reports that despite the Democratic Senate majority, the bill is likely to clear the upper chamber as well. Senators Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, and Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, both red state Democrats facing a steep re-election challenge in 2024, have said they will vote for the resolution. And on Thursday, a third, far less precariously positioned Democrat, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, also said he would back the resolution. The three Democratic commitments, as well as that of Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, guarantee the resolution at least 53 votes in the Senate if every Republican supports it. That reporting from the Hill. But it is worth noting that if the president does veto it, overturning a veto would require a 2/3 vote in the House and Senate. More on trade. This from CTV out of Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took his Canadian sales pitch to an influential U.S. audience Friday morning. He spoke at the Council on Foreign Relations, a respected New York think tank, to promote Canada as a wise investment and trusted trading partner. The idea was to capitalize on the momentum that was generated by last month's visit to Ottawa by U.S. President Joe Biden, the centerpiece of which was a new Canada-U.S. strategy for the extraction, development, and processing of critical minerals. As the Canadian government works to shore up that domestic industry, the Prime Minister emphasized that democracies must work together to protect their values and economic interests in the face of rising authoritarianism. That was from CTV. C-SPAN covered the Prime Minister's discussion at Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Here's the CFR President Richard Haas asking about Canadian versus American trade policy.
Is there any tension between a Canada, as you described it, that is signing more trade agreements than anyone, and the United States that essentially is out of the business of signing trade agreements? We've become more protectionist, industrial planners, what have you. You've clearly embraced free trade, or a version of it with fairness. Do you worry that that means that these two integrated economies in some ways now are on slightly different trajectories?
Not particularly. The United States has always been a big enough market unto itself to be able to not have to worry too much about trade. Trade is good, trade is a bonus, trade should happen. Canada has always had far too many resources for the number of people that we have, so we've always needed to look to trade. So that has been a part of our makeup and part of our respective identities for a very, very long time. And we've ended up working it out in very complementary ways, where Canada can be more open to the world, and the US perfectly happy chugging along doing its own thing for the most part. You can't be Canadian without being aware of the US, because the scale is so much bigger, right? I mean, that's just, so as soon as you're aware of one other country, easy to be aware of all other countries. Americans do just fine being very aware of America, and you have the size that backs it up. So there's always going to be that slight misalignment, but we make it work for us, and
you should go into politics.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. He also said a number of U.S. jurisdictions outbid Canada in the recent race to get Volkswagen's new battery plant. But Canada prevailed because of its clean energy supply, educated workforce, critical minerals, and investments in the middle class. And the Prime Minister suggested that China uses slave labor to produce lithium. And that is why Canadian production is more expensive. You can find the full program at cspan.org, our video library. From the Financial Post, uncertainty around when Congress may raise the U.S. debt ceiling is likely to hinder the Treasury Department from making large changes in how it will fund itself in the third quarter when it announces its plans next week. But markets could face new volatility if it warns of the potential to run out of cash soon. House Republicans passed a bill this week that would raise the debt ceiling but also cut federal spending. It's a combination that congressional Democrats and President Biden are rejecting. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked today what happens next.
Despite your argument, it's not moving the needle with Republicans. So what is the path forward, and when does the president need to just sit down with the speaker?
When you say it's not moving the needle with Republicans, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it seems neither side is blinking. Republicans have their plan. You guys want a clean debt ceiling increase, and nobody seems to be sitting down at the table with each other.
Well, our position will continue to be clear that the only responsible thing to do with respect to avoiding a catastrophic default on our debt is to do what has consistently been done under Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, which is to make sure that America pays her bills. That is the only responsible position at this particular point in time. Now, the Default on America Act was sent over to the Senate. The Senate will have to take steps to evaluate that legislation. What seems clear to everyone is that it's dead on arrival. It's not a serious proposal. It doesn't even have support from many of the Senate Republicans. That's the untenable position that exists in the Congress right now.
Serious or not serious, shouldn't the president engage?
The president has continued to make clear that he is willing to talk to anyone on Capitol Hill about the type of spending decisions, investment decisions, and revenue decisions that should be made to protect the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. There is a process for that to occur. It's called the budget. President Biden has released his budget over a month ago. President Biden's budget will create an economy that works for everyday Americans. His budget will protect and strengthen Social Security. His budget will cut the deficit by $3 trillion. We are still waiting for House Republicans to produce a budget. They produced a ransom note and said, pass our irresponsible Default on America Act, or else we're going to default. That's not serious. That's not responsible.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, minority leader, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska joined C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program to talk about the debt ceiling and the budget.
The Republicans, we control the House with only 4 votes, but the Senate is controlled by Democrats only by 2 votes. Of course, we got a Democrat president. We have to accept the fact that we're going to have to compromise and find middle ground. So on our side of the aisle, we know you can't expect the moon. There's got to be some realistic expectations. But for Joe Biden to say he refuses to negotiate, that is not right either. By the way, when Joe Biden was a senator, he wanted negotiations on the debt ceiling. Now that he's president, he's saying no. But we just got to sit down and find some middle ground. We have to raise the debt ceiling. That's a fact. We also have to curtail spending. If we do nothing, we're going to have a 200% debt to GDP ratio by 2040. And that's a house of cards for our country, a fiscal house of cards. So we need to get our financial house in order at the same time as we raise our debt ceiling. And it's going to take Republicans and Democrats working together to do this.
When does default now become a bigger concern than curtailing spending in the future? Is there a point at which this just needs to be raised?
If the president sat at the table and offered reasonable compromises and reasonable solutions, a lot of Republicans will come over and say, okay, we'll accept that and we'll keep working at this. But for the president to say that he refuses to negotiate in a divided government, when he himself as a senator 3 times demanded negotiations for debt ceiling, we're not going to give in to that. I think he's the one putting the blackmail down on us. But I would say that if he's reasonable, there's Republicans like myself that wants to make a deal, because our country is the greatest country in the world. We got to start acting like it, and we got to start reaching in the middle and make things and get things done.
Congressman Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. On Wall Street, the Dow up 272, NASDAQ up 84, S&P up 34. The number of Americans filing for unemployment insurance benefits for the week ending April 22nd fell by 16,000 to 230,000, that from the Labor Department today. And the Federal Reserve has released its report on the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. ABC News writes the Fed sharply criticized leadership at Silicon Valley Bank for a textbook case of mismanagement. But the report also faulted the Fed's lax oversight and an inability to anticipate the systemic threat posed by the bank's failure. The collapse last month of Silicon Valley Bank, the nation's 16th largest bank, set off a financial panic that led to the failure 2 days later of another major lender, Signature Bank. A House Financial Services subcommittee holding a hearing today on the future of the National Flood Insurance Program. An article at FEMA.gov explains that since Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast in 2005, the National Flood Insurance Program debt to the U.S. Treasury has remained steep. It currently is $20.5 billion. In 2022 alone, the program will pay over $280 million in interest on that debt. That article at FEMA continues, frequent high-cost flooding will prevent the NFIP from paying its debt. The program currently uses only premiums to cover the interest on debt from prior losses, which is a practice that needs to change to improve the sound financial framework of the program. Here's part of today's hearing. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, questioning David Morstad, senior executive at the National Flood Insurance Program.
Congress has designed the NFIP again to be self-funded through annual insurance premiums collected from policyholders. Currently, the NFIP is drowning in $20.5 billion in debt. Who do you owe debt to?
We owe debt to the federal treasury, ma'am.
To the government?
Yes, to the government.
Are you part of the government?
We are.
So the government wants you to repay the government this debt, is that right?
That's our obligation.
Oh, that doesn't make good sense. The NFIP is drowning in $20.5 billion in debt with $1 million in interest accruing every single day. Again, what effect would it have if Congress simply enacts a clean reauthorization of the NFIP and maintains the status quo for the program and its debt?
Thank you. The cancellation of the debt is one of the recommendations that's one of the 17 recommendations that we've put forward, and is the basis for which we can start to begin a sound financial framework for the program that is understandable, transparent, and predictable. So it's vitally important that we have the debt canceled, that we don't have the burden of the interest costs that you mentioned that are only going up in this high interest environment. So it's a key part of the recommendations that we've put forward.
So in addition to your basic responsibility, you can't even get to mitigation and helping locals with mitigation measures and other kinds of things that would help when these floods come. And so have you made it known to everybody and both sides of the aisle understand that we need debt cancellation?
Yes, I mean, we've been very clear how important that is, and we also do want to, however, thank Congress and the administration for the unprecedented amount of dollars that have been provided to FEMA for our mitigation programs, whether that be our building infrastructure and community program, whether that would be our flood mitigation assistance grant program. We do have more mitigation dollars available than we have before. We still a long ways from meeting the entire need, but it's definitely progress, and we're looking at making sure that all parts of the community, socially disadvantaged, vulnerable communities, are also a part of these new grant proposals that are unfolding.
So since I've worked on flood insurance for a long time, would you describe the competition in the United States from various areas putting pressure on you to say, you know, my area is more important than their area. I need more up here than they need. Would you describe to them the kind of competition that you're confronted with where people are desperate for help that you cannot provide?
Well, there isn't any any question that the members are most concerned about their own constituents, and that's who we hear from a lot. But I would say that all across the country we work with, through our regions, worth the states, to identify the risky areas in their communities that would be able to have access to our mitigation funding. So we run a national program. We're sensitive to all parts of the country, and we're, I think, doing a good job of making sure that we don't leave anybody behind.
You're doing the best job that you can possibly do, but I want you today to let these people know they can leave us fighting with each other about what's needed on the East Coast as opposed to what's needed in the South, and on and on and on, or we can cancel this debt and do something about flood insurance. That's all I want you to do.
There's no question that the competition for mitigation funds is steep. We generally are 3 to 4 times oversubscribed when we have our grant process. So there's a great need for mitigation across the country.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, she chairs the full Financial Services Committee at today's subcommittee hearing. The witness, David Marstad, Senior Executive, National Flood Insurance Program, and Assistant Administrator at FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. National Flood Insurance Program authorization expires at the end of the current fiscal year, September 30th. More from the FEMA.gov article. Since the NFIP's last multi-year reauthorization expired on September 30th, 2017, the program has experienced 21 short-term extensions, including 3 brief lapses. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Associated Press reporting from Ukraine, Russia fired more than 20 cruise missiles and 2 drones at Ukraine early Friday, killing at least 23 people, almost all of them when 2 missiles slammed into an apartment building in a terrifying nighttime attack, officials said. 3 children were among the dead. The missile attacks included the first one against Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, in nearly 2 months, although there were no reports of any targets hit. Reaction from the U.S. State Department with the principal deputy spokesperson, Vedant Patel.
Give your comments on the overnight missile attack in Ukraine. Looks like they are shifting their strategy. They haven't been doing this for more than 50 days. How did you read that, and what is your reaction to overnight missile attacks? The number of victims is growing.
Well, Alex, this is another example in a long line of examples of Russia's brazen disregard of Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian life. Time and time again, we have seen them take volatile and reckless actions as it relates to their unjust war in Ukraine. And the United States is going to continue to do what it can to support our Ukrainian partners, continue to do what we can to hold the Russian Federation accountable as well.
State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel taking reporters' questions today. CNN writes that Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree Thursday that allows the deportation of Ukrainian citizens from the territories declared annexed by Russia if they are considered a national security threat. According to the decree published online, residents in the annexed territories who have not taken Russian citizenship will be recognized as foreigners. Back to the State Department briefing, Vedant Patel also giving an update on efforts to advise U.S. nationals in Sudan who want to leave to escape the open warfare there between rival generals, how to get out. State Department estimates 16,000 Americans remain in Sudan and issued a security alert this week that, quote, due to the uncertain security situation in Khartoum and closure of the airport, it is not currently safe to undertake a U.S. government-coordinated evacuation of private U.S. citizens.
Over the course of this crisis, we have been actively soliciting contact with U.S. citizens seeking help. So far, fewer than 5,000 U.S. citizens have requested additional information from us. Of those, only a fraction have actively sought our assistance to depart Sudan. We can also confirm that in addition to our official embassy personnel, several hundred U.S. citizens have already departed Sudan, either by land, sea, or aircraft. We encourage U.S. citizens who are no longer in Sudan to respond to the message they received when they first completed the online crisis form to inform us of their safe departure. We are providing the best possible information we can to anyone asking for our assistance about conditions regarding safety and security so that they can make their own decisions about whether and when to depart. As Secretary Blinken has previously communicated, the U.S. is committed to bringing an end to the conflict in Sudan, and to that end, the U.S., in close cooperation with our partners, has been continuously engaging the SAF and the RSF. The parties agreed to extend the current ceasefire for an additional 72 hours and have expressed their readiness to engage in dialogue to establish a durable cessation of hostilities and humanitarian arrangements. It is clear that there have been multiple violations of the ceasefire, but implementing ceasefires is often difficult at the start, but the violations of the ceasefire do not mean a failure of the ceasefire. And we are working with partners to ensure better monitoring of activity and engaging both parties to improve adherence.
State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel. From the New York Times, civilians continue to flee renewed clashes in Sudan on Friday as a 3-day extension of an already tenuous truce got off to a fitful start, and foreign countries ramped up evacuations after warning of an escalation of violence in the coming days. You're listening to Washington Today. President Joe Biden presenting today the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy to the Air Force Academy football team, the Falcons. The trophy is given each year to the team that wins the college football series among the Army, Navy, and Air Force academies. The Air Force clinched the trophy with a 13-7 win over Army in the 2022 season.
You had all those wins while drilling, training, and serving day in and day out at the academy as cadets. After every game, you hung up your uniform, and you immediately put on another one representing your nation, the United States of America. Simply put, you've not only carried on the academy's football traditions, you've stepped up to join a long line of American service members, each a link in a chain of honor, each one. And you know that when you do become officers, that is the team that matters most. You continue to have each other's backs. An Air Force team, a Space Force team. Together you represent the very best of who we are as Americans, and that's not hyperbole. Your school motto, if I take a little liberty with it, you put integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all you do, That's not only your school motto, it's who you are. It's who you are. Proud not only to have achieved, but all that you can do if you continue to work together. That's who you are. That is why you're the soul. Like President Eisenhower said all those years ago, that soul will now live on another generation thanks to you and all our brave service members and their families. So as your Commander-in-Chief, it's my honor to award you the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy. As I said, Coach, why don't you show people how you can pick it up, hold it over your head for a while. And I said, it's bigger than a Super Bowl trophy. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? I know it's not the first time you've seen it. So congratulations. And one more thing. Let's fly. Let's fly.
President Biden in the White House East Room with the Air Force Academy football team. The Air Force has won a record 21 Commander-in-Chief trophies. Next is the Navy Academy Midshipmen with 16, and the Army Black Knights have 9. The trophy has been shared 5 times. The White House Correspondents Association dinner is Saturday. It's the annual gathering of journalists, politicians, and often celebrities. C-SPAN's live coverage begins Saturday online at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now app at 6 p.m. Eastern with the guest arrivals. Then at 8 p.m. Eastern, C-SPAN Television's live coverage starts, the presentation of awards and scholarships by the association. C-SPAN Radio will join the live coverage when the after-dinner remarks begin, probably around 9:30 or 9:45 p.m. Eastern. The entertainment is comedian Roy Wood Jr. and also scheduled to speak, President Biden, who, if History's Any Guide will be telling some jokes as well. Tamara Keith is president of the White House Correspondents Association. She talked about the dinner on MSNBC Thursday night.
So what I think people should be looking out for, my hope is that with this dinner, we drive a message. We drive a message from start to finish about the importance of the work that we do. And yes, it's a little bit of navel gazing and it's a little bit of self-importance, but you know what? The White House Press Corps is there to shine a light on behalf of the American people. It's not about us. When we're shouting in the Oval Office and making a ruckus, it's not about us. We are shouting for the American people. We are asking the questions that they want answered. So I hope that that's the message that is carried throughout the dinner. We'll have some surprise celebrity appearances. We'll have very on message, though. And we will be honoring with the Dunnigan Payne Prize, Gwen Eiffel of PBS NewsHour and Bill Plant from CBS News, two absolute icons, legends, people who show us how it should be done. And who sadly are no longer with us. Also, we'll be honoring our award winners, which include a wide range of people, but including Doug Mills of the New York Times for just a terrific photograph, and also the reporters who broke the Dobbs decision story.
Tamara Keith, president of the White House Correspondents Association, on MSNBC Thursday night. As mentioned, the headliner for this year's dinner is comedian Roy Wood Jr., perhaps best known as a Daily Show correspondent. He spoke with The Hill this week about how he'll approach telling political jokes.
What is your game plan for going into this year's dinner?
To follow the long line of daredevils and survive. That is the plan. I spoke with Hassan Minhaj about this a couple of days ago. And he was like, okay, you need to know the layout of the room. You need to know where everybody's sitting. You need to know who's there so you can figure out what jokes. And I'm at a point now where I feel like just because somebody isn't there doesn't mean you can't get joked about. Like, avoiding the event does not keep you from being held accountable. And accountability will be on both sides for the record also. This isn't some Republican bash fest. I think it's fair to come into this with fair critiques about politicians, also the role that media plays, but more importantly, the blind spot that I think a lot of the American public have to the media. Because let's not forget about the whole purpose of the event also is to provide scholarships for young students who want to go into journalism. We do not know why. This event should be to talk people out of getting into journalism. That's what the event should be for, but let's not ignore the actual purpose of it. So, we'll crack some jokes, but I think somewhere in there, it's good to have something of relevance to say. This dinner is unique to me in that it's one of the few times that a constituent actually gets to speak to the politicians and they heard your message. You don't know if AOC read your tweet. She probably didn't. But she's going to be in the room tonight. I want to say something to her for you. Give me the message you want me to say to the politicians.
Do you plan on taking shots at lawmakers on both sides of the aisle?
Yeah, I think you have to take shots at lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Otherwise, you're not honoring the job. I don't think that we can sit here and act like both parties have been perfect in their duties of serving the American people. So if that's the case, yeah, I'm gonna Republicans lie, Democrats overpromise. I think that's probably one way to go with it. But, we're going to keep looking at policies and stuff that are in place and then start trying to, figure it all out.
Comedian Roy Wood Jr., who will be speaking Saturday night at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Again, C-SPAN's live coverage begins online at cspan.org and on the C-SPAN Now app, 6 p.m. Eastern Saturday with guest arrivals. Then at 8 p.m. Eastern, C-SPAN Television begins live coverage, and C-SPAN Radio will join in when the entertainment begins, plus President Biden's speech somewhere around 9:30, 9:45 Eastern. C-SPAN also has a special webpage with video of arrivals, entertainment, and speeches from the 2022 Correspondents' Dinner and nearly all past dinners dating back to 1988. It's at c-span.org/2023 White House Correspondents Association dinner. WTOP News in Washington reports a newly formed group of climate activists plans to disrupt a high-profile D.C. tradition this weekend, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Visitors to the Climate Defiance website are greeted with a full-page video featuring images of President Joe Biden interlaced with burning forests, storm-ravaged neighborhoods, cracked ice sheets, and churning oil rigs. Youth-led demonstrators, according to the group's site and social media feeds, will form a blockade Saturday evening around the dinner's annual venue at the Washington Hilton as part of a push to end fossil fuel extraction on federal lands and waters. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Saturday morning, Anna Giaratelli with the Washington Examiner talks about House Republicans' focus on Border Patrol and Homeland Security's efforts to monitor the southern border. And then El Dorado High School teacher Sunshine Cavaluzzi answers questions about the upcoming Advanced Placement U.S. Government and Politics exam and how students can prepare for it. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Saturday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.